we can't go to stones expecting one and only one benefit. So if we release all that and just be open to experience anything, we're more likely to notice whatever subtle changes are coming. One of the main reasons I wrote the Seven Archetypal Stones is because I wanted people to learn to think about rocks in a new way, not just carry this to heal gout and carry this to give you energy, but how can we really look at the way the mineral kingdom influences our lives, shapes our consciousness.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Sabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. We've got a great show in store today. We're going to be talking all about crystals and stones and how we can incorporate them into our lives and into our practice. Here to talk with us is expert Nicholas Pearson. He's been immersed in the mineral kingdom for over 20 years, and he's authored the book, The Seven Archetypal Stones, Their Spiritual Powers and Teachings, and his next release, Crystals for Karmic Healing, is due out later in January of 2017. Excited to have him on the show. Nicholas, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashton. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So you've been teaching people about crystals and stones since high school, and 20 plus years later, you're still teaching people about stones and crystals. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, what got you interested to begin with, and what's kept the passion and interest for all these years?
Yeah, absolutely. It started off when I was the kind of kid who picked up stones from the roadside, national parks, my grandparents' neighbor's driveway. That was just what I loved. There was some sort of resonance between me and this earthy substance. And then when I was about 8, my grandfather gave me my first piece of quartz, my first actual mineral specimen, and I was just hooked. So, 22 years later, I'm still collecting, and now I'm writing. Sometime around high school, though, my focus really shifted more towards bridging the sort of scientific stuff that I'd always been interested with the cultural, mythological, spiritual side that fascinated me, but obviously had no firm explanation. So when I was a senior in high school, I started teaching some workshops, and eventually I went away to college. And unbeknownst to me, the school I went to study music at had a fine earth science museum with a massive mineral collection that the universe, of course, would have me randomly assigned to, as things are. And I fell in love. I got a chance to really deepen my scientific understanding of the mineral kingdom. That really drove me to sort of seek out what the underlying mechanisms are for how and why spiritual properties exist in stones.
And you actually define a term in your book called Ethno Geology. Could you explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah. So some years ago, I was working my retail career. I was in management, and I read about spiritual things as my avocation, something to sort of take my mind off of real life. And I was really fascinated by ethnobotany for a little while there. And ethnobotanists go out into the field and they look at how native cultures work with the plant kingdom. So that might be for a ceremony, it might be for healing, it might be as medicine, but oftentimes it's deeply spiritual. And these scientists, it's an interdisciplinary field. So you've got ethnographers and anthropologists. You've got people studying the language around plants as well as the hard science of it, the botany, the chemistry. And they pull all this together to gain an understanding of why these plants are significant to native peoples. And the side effect of that, the end result, is we actually get a lot of medicine from this sort of practice. And I noticed that was similar to the way I approached working with stone. I love the mythology behind it. I love the language, the culture, the history, the religious practices that are sort of built up around the mineral kingdom. But I'm always looking for a way to have that road back to the science, how they form, what they're made from, their inner and outer geometries, because all of those things are what lead to the individual expressions of a stone's powers.
Well, and I love that too, because I tend to lean much more towards a very grounded, rational way of approaching things, even though I kind of dance in a lot of these more far out there areas. And stones is one of those areas where I have a hard time personally, like getting very scientific in explanations about it, but I know that they have effect. I know they have worked. I've actually worked a lot with working a lot with plant medicine and the stones at the same time. Also with a lot of just practices stuff that I've done over the years. I know that they have effect, but it's hard for me to explain it outside of kind of the folk knowledge of it all. So I love that you bring it back into, okay, what can we actually demonstrate through science, and it can actually repeat and show about some of these things. So it is leading back to that, and I definitely appreciate that. In your book, it's the Seven Archetypal Stones. You talk about, and there are kind of sub-archetypes in there as well for some of them, but you list those seven, which are obsidian, jade, lapis lazuli, emerald, amethyst, quartz, and diamond. I'm wondering if you could quickly summarize and explain what these seven archetypes are.
Definitely. So, for each stone, I sort of go through three main roles that it is played. I've got two of these externally visible archetypes, the explicate ones, ones you can see in the world. So in the case of obsidian, we might see it in terms of the types of artifacts that are made from obsidian. But then there's always that inner component as well that we can only look at either through the eyes of modern science or maybe by taking a deeper spiritual approach to the stone. So, bearing that in mind, in brief, with obsidian, we have this ear point, the sharp cutting edge, and we also have the reflective surface in the obsidian mirror. So that is a stone that helps us really hone the mind to a sharp point and reflect. And it takes us deeper inwards to the cauldron of initiation, which is its third archetype in terms of the void. With jade. Jade is actually not a single stone. It's a couple different rocks that can be made of multiple different minerals as well. And, all around the world where you find jade, it is connected to this sort of otherworldly sense. We find masks carved from jade. We see these guardian figures, deities, and dragons carved from jade. And all of these are tools for helping us cross the threshold to the celestial realms, which we see in the third archetype. With lapis, just looking at a rough piece of lapis, it resembles the night sky. So that's its sort of primordial inspiration since the dawn of time when humankind found lapis. They were curious how this starry stone was located in the heart of the earth, even though it resembled the very heavens themselves. It's also a stone that grants us clear vision and is often associated with eye imagery, like the eye of the Buddha, the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, and in today's modern crystal lore, the third eye or the brow chakra. And then we have, at the heart of the book, we have our first true mineral. The first three are actually rocks because they're combinations, they're aggregates of one or more minerals. So emerald starts to be a lot more refined. Emerald teaches us about alchemy. We see the archetype in myth and folklore of the emerald tablet, the instructions for alchemy itself, and then also the Holy Grail, the vessel in which our spiritual alchemy takes place, and that's sort of a metaphor for our own heart. And that leads us to a state of innocence and grace where we can sort of rebirth the new consciousness, which takes us into its third archetype. And then we go to amethyst. Amethyst is fun because I got to use some fresher perspectives on it and talk about its relationship with the violet flame and the violet ray, which are also tools for alchemy. We got to talk in the book also about its relationship with sacred space in general. It's a very sacred ecclesiastical stone. It represents temperance. Its name actually means not drunken, amethustos in Greek. So it helps us sort of abstain from the things that hold us back spiritually. And that doesn't, necessarily mean not enjoying a glass of wine every now and then, but it's about releasing the consciousness, the leaden consciousness that keeps us from passing into that sacred space. And quartz, the clear quartz, in chapter 6, we see the prismatic shape of the crystal resembles the sort of platonic ideal of a magic wand. It is this masculine, projective, directed focus that we get from it, but it has a deep relationship with light as well. It works just like a prism. Light passes through it and is refracted into the full spectrum. If you've ever left some crystals on the windowsill, I'm sure you've seen this. And as lapidary technology evolved over the eons, people could polish it into rounded forms. And instead of just being a prism, it also became a lens. So we see globes, spheres, lenses, brain glasses made from quartz. And that sort of represents our ability to refine our own nature, to grow with the light. And as we do so, we become more crystalline ourselves, which is its sort of final role described in the book. And finally, we end with diamond. So we start with obsidian, which is actually an amorphous solid. It has no crystal structure whatsoever. It's chaotic. It's kind of a mess, structurally speaking. But it has pure potential within it. And we end with diamond, the most perfect of all the stones in the book. It has this idealized geometry inside and out. It is the hardest of all naturally occurring minerals. And it has a very, very regular composition and structure. So it's a real sharp contrast to obsidian. But they represent similar ideals. They're both stones of initiation. And the way diamond works is it works by helping us vibrate in a state of unconditional love. The word diamond itself in English comes via French. And in Middle French, for a hot minute, the word for diamond was actually Dieu amant, which means lover of God. It was sort of an approximation of the Greek word adamas, which means not conquerable or untamed, indomitable. But it also referred to the fact that diamond represents this sort of divine love that conquers everything else. And when we resonate in that, we get the second archetype. We prepare for it, and that is the archetype of the thunderbolt, where we receive the flash of illumination or the flash of inspiration that leads us towards enlightenment. And from there, we're at that blissful space. So diamond helps take us there.
Love it. Well, and you go really into depth in all of these concepts in your book, the Seven Archetypal Stones. So if anybody wants to get really into it, that's a great place for them to start. I would like to expand, maybe it's a little selfishly, on just the three that I'm very interested in, that I work with myself. Like as we're speaking, I have a Lapis Lazuli ring that I got in Rishikesh in India years ago. I wear it all the time. I wear it a lot during meditation and when I'm doing these shows, for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned briefly in terms of clarity and things like that. If people were to use lapis, maybe we could describe it for those that don't know. I mean, you mentioned that it looks like the sky in terms of usually in its blue colors, it's got flecks of gold, things like that. Maybe we could expand on that and then talk about ways that people could use lapis in their lives a little more regularly.
Absolutely, yeah. So lapis is one of my all-time favorite gemstones. I have a piece in my pocket right now as well. So we're on the same wavelength there. This is a stone that, in most modern crystal healing literature, you're going to see either ascribed to the throat chakra because it's blue, or maybe towards the brow chakra because it's a darker blue, almost indigo. But when we break down the energies emitted by any substance, especially in terms of the mineral kingdom, but everything is emitting a broad spectrum of wavelengths at all times. Crystals emit very specific wavelengths because they have very specific structures. They're kind of like solid state oscillators. Because of how they're formed and what they're made from, they emit a very concise and coherent signal. So the vast majority of that signal is not produced by its color. So for those sorts of things, we have to look at everything that's underneath the surface. So it does a lot more than just resonate at the brow or the throat chakra. The primary function of lapis in terms of healing is to harmonize the heart and the mind. It helps to sort of lessen the disparity, especially in the Western world. We're taught that our feelings and our thoughts are separate things. We keep them in separate boxes, and we only pull one down at a time as needed. If you go to Eastern cultures, if we look at Japanese or Chinese, for example, their word for heart is the same as the word for mind. They don't really use two separate concepts for these. If you ask a Japanese person what they think about something, they'll give you an answer. And when you ask them what they feel about the same thing, they suddenly get confused because there's no nuance there for them like we have. And lapis helps to reconcile the sort of battle that we have between heart and mind. And as we do that, we naturally become clearer communicators because we're working unilaterally on a mental, intellectual level, as well as on that emotional, spiritual level, towards the same end. So it's a great stone for communication. It's a wonderful stone for deepening our insight, for expanding our horizons spiritually or psychically. And that's sort of owed to that starry appearance that it has. It's a stone that's formed at the bottom of the ocean, back in the primordial sea, from the shells and exoskeletons of long extinct creatures. And then because of the metamorphic processes that took that ancient seabed up into the tallest mountain and subjected it to greater heat and greater pressure, it organized and rearranged itself and was transformed into a new stone. We went from limestone to this beautiful ultramarine blue stone. And so it's something very humble. Its origins are at the very bottom, the lowest elevation you can imagine, the bottom of the ancient sea. And now it's found in some of the highest mountains in the world. So it reminds us that we have similar origins. We are, humble. We come from Earth just like everyone else, but our true nature, our spiritual nature, our cosmic origins are far beyond this planet, and they're from the stars themselves.
With stones, it's such a subtle energy. With my own personal experiences, I was living abroad for a number of years doing lots of yoga practice, lots of different types of work, and stones were a regular part of that because I was so attuned to subtle energy. And now that I've been back in the United States now for the past almost 5 years, I noticed that, because I have to be grounded in the world, it's a lot harder to pick up on the subtle energies. So I understand when people say, well, look, I'm holding 2 different rocks in my hand. I don't really feel anything. I don't know what you're talking about, so it must all be mumbo jumbo. How do you help people that might be a little bit more skeptical or even open to the idea, but just have a harder time tuning into the subtle energies of them? How do you encourage them, or what would you suggest to them to develop a greater sense of what these stones could do for them?
There are a few options. Especially if someone's genuinely interested but just having trouble making the connection, I say, if you have a big collection, put it all out in front of you. Don't think about it. Close your eyes, clear your mind for a moment. Have no preconceived notions or attachments or expectations. And when you open your eyes, pick up the first one that jumps out at you. If you don't have a collection, do the same thing, but in a store that's, just overflowing with rocks. Hopefully the one you pick up is in your budget, but if not, they often have a way of coming back to you. But when you really do this without looking for a preconceived idea of what the stone is going to do for you, then you're more likely to recognize what benefits it has. In the modern crystal healing movement, there's a strong tendency towards one of my friends, colleagues, and teachers calls prescriptive stone use. We go to the book first. We look up the stone that's going to, cure a broken bone or heal warts or make our depression magically go away. And the more we read about stones, the more stones we think we need, and it becomes very materialistic. But we also aren't giving ourselves credit that maybe the particular stones we have and our particular frequency aren't exactly the same as that exact same specimen or a different specimen of the exact same stone that another author had when they wrote about it with their own personal sister. So we can't go to stones expecting one and only one benefit. So if we release all that and just be open to experience anything, we're more likely to notice whatever subtle changes are coming. One of the main reasons I wrote the Seven Archetypal Stones is because I wanted people to learn to think about rocks in a new way, not just carry this to heal gout and carry this to give you energy, but how can we really look at the way the mineral kingdom influences our lives, shapes our consciousness. And once we learn to do it by following the examples of these 7 stones, we can start to do it by spending the same sorts of meditative experiences with any of the other crystals in our collections.
Can we talk about a little more about quartz? Just because it is such a common stone. I mean, you can find it even in cell phones and watches, things like that. It's used in everyday life quite a bit, but it's also one of those that, I mean, anyone that works with stones has some quartz in their collection. Can we talk a little bit about some of the I mean, you were just saying, well, don't do it prescriptively, don't do it just by the book, but talking about just some of the ways perhaps that we could utilize quartz, maybe if not so much just the qualities from a book.
Right, yeah. So, quartz is sort of an all-purpose stone. The reason it does so many things for us is because it works broad spectrum. In gemstone therapy, we talk about the 7 color rays. They're not really the same thing as the 7 esoteric rays, which is a whole conversation for someone who's an expert on them to have, and that's not me. But the color rays are sort of the primordial, fundamental principles of the mind of God, broken up into visible wavelengths of light. And quartz actually attracts all 7 color rays in equal temperament. So, in other words, it works on the complete spectrum spiritually, not just because it refracts light into all 7 colors. And so we can really use it for just about anything. The best way we can derive our benefit from any stone, not just quartz, but any of them, is to consciously connect and co-create with them. And what that means is if quartz does a little bit of everything, it's kind of like having a computer with a whole lot of programs installed. If we don't tell it which one to use specifically, we don't get anything done. So in the book, you'll find some exercises for actually cleansing crystals or programming them to invite them to work on a specific outcome or specific goal. And the beautiful thing is you don't have to look up that outcome or goal in a book. If you have a stone that you really resonate with and a specific outcome or project in mind, then just ask it to participate with you through this process of programming. And it's more than happy to do so.
What I found too with quartz is that, at least in my own experience, where sometimes I'll see some quartz somewhere, and usually I only ever get a stone that's if I'm buying it for a purpose. But I've found stones before. In particular, I'm thinking of one crystal piece where I didn't know why I was getting it. I just knew that I had to, and then it related to for a couple months later, I was with a friend of mine, and we were in Peru, and we were doing this work, and it essentially in that moment let me know the use of what it was there for, and it was actually for my friend and the work that he was doing. But there's such this beautiful, intuitive, subtle connection that we can develop with stones, but we have to be willing to sort of open ourselves up to some possibilities beyond the super grounded thought process. Well, a rock is a rock, which again is one of the reasons why I love your work, because you do try to blend. It's not too far out there with concepts of what these things are doing. You're bringing it back to, okay, well, what might be bring this from a way that could be explained and reproduced and shown through science, which is great. What would you suggest? You mentioned in terms of, okay, well, this is a great way to pick a stone. If people either already have some stones or they've gone and picked a stone, how do you recommend in a general way that people start to work with these? Is it best to wear them on your skin, or you mentioned you have one in your pocket? Is it okay if it's on you or in a room? What are ways that people can really integrate stones more into their lives?
There are so many different types of stones and so many different applications for them that it's really a highly personal question. But let's say you have one in particular that you want to work with, either because it's brand new or it's an old favorite or just jumps out at you from your collection. The very best thing that you can do, hands down, is to sit with that stone in meditation with no attachment to outcome. Because that's how we really learn from the mineral kingdom. And crystals are naturally good at reflecting, focusing, transmitting, receiving, storing, translating information and energy. So it's going to reflect a lot of our own stuff back at us. But that's how we learn and how we grow. And, depending on what that mineral is made from, it will reflect in different ways or focus in different ways or translate in different ways. So hands down, sitting quietly with no expectation, best way to reap the rewards of a stone. That being said, we can't do that 24 hours a day, or at least most of us can't. We get fidgety after a little while. So, use them in whatever way works for you. If something is water stable, you can put it in the bathtub with you. If something is, not too fragile. You can wear it or keep it in a pocket. You can keep it in your sacred space if you have an altar, or maybe right beside your bed. You can put it under your pillow. Whatever you really feel guided to do, that is what you should be doing. And some stones, in fact, our best teachers are often the ones that don't feel really comfortable to have with us all the time. The ones that feel super comfy are the ones that are reminding us of lessons we've already integrated, things that we've already mastered. But the ones that sort of rock the boat a little bit are the ones trying to teach us new things. And those might not be appropriate to take out into the world with you. If you have to clock into your 9-to-5 job and you want to work with some real high vibe stones that are going to leave you feeling a little unsettled as you integrate their information, it's probably best to leave them at home and sit with them in quiet time, maybe work with them overnight as long as you can sleep restfully with them. So just kind of experiment. There's no wrong way to work with crystals as long as it's continuing to make you feel good.
Moldavite is one of those stones for me that you just mentioned, like you got to leave it at home sometimes, where this super high vibration stone where it's like, cool, it does this very specific work when we're doing it, but man, I can't have it around all the time because it's so intense. Before we jump into the next question, I want to ask too, what do you think about, since you were mentioning a few things, I remember a lot of people back on the island where I lived, they would actually charge their water with stones. So they would put various stones into a glass water container, something like that, and pour their water and drink it out of that. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a great idea. You need to know about composition, hardness, and a few other things. So not every stone in your collection is going to be good for it. Some things are porous and will either fall apart or break down, contaminate your water. Some things are toxic. If you've got lead or arsenic or other things that you wouldn't want to ingest, they shouldn't go in your water. But most things in the quartz family are great. As are a bunch of other stones. Just make sure they're natural, they're not dyed, because you don't want to drink non-food grade dye naturally. So I keep shungite. It's a carbon-based rock in my water at all times, and occasionally I add other things. I'm a big fan of aquamarine imprinted water. Aquamarine is a stone that helps get in touch with a true state of illumination. It helps us release all the things that aren't serving us so we can sort of open up to our next chapter. And it also improves or increases a quality called energetic liquidity, wherein the information that we're made from, as well as the physical structures that's translated to, are able to move and adapt according to their spiritual blueprints in real time. And one of the reasons that we experience illness or disease or friction in life is when we're sort of trapped in this manifest physical form on a real fundamental, microscopic, atomic, subatomic level, and can't go back to the energetic form, being a particle versus a wavelength, because it's only in that energetic state that we can retrieve information from our spiritual blueprints. And that's something I talk a little bit more about in the second book, Crystals for Karmic Healing, because karma is usually the main reason that we are inhibited from going back to that blueprint state and course correcting.
What's your favorite type of stone and why?
Oh,
it's kind of, maybe it's like asking someone for their favorite child, but I'm still going to put you on the spot anyways.
That's okay. Just about any given day of the week, I'm going to say petersite. Petersite's a relative of tiger's eye, and it undergoes some unique geological things that sort of breaks it down and causes the colors to change, so you can get a beautiful multicolored stone from it. And it's sort of sealed back together, glued back by the forces of the earth. And it helps us weather these storms that we experience in life. If you look at it, it looks like a swirling storm cloud. And here in Central Florida, we know our fair share of storm clouds. It really has this appearance of movement, almost as something that could be ominous. But what happens after the storm is we get freshness, we get renewal and rejuvenation. Petersite's also a stone of authenticity. It allows us to live and breathe and work from the space of our teachings. So it really helps us walk our walk and talk our talk. It's a great stone for living your personal truth.
Awesome. A thought came to my mind that you might be the person to ask for something like this. For people out there that have a stone, and I would put myself in this group as well, and we're like, okay, we came across a stone. We've got no clue what the stone is, are there resources that you could suggest to our listeners of like, okay, go to this website and you might be able to track it down? Or I know there's apps now for like leaves that you can take a picture of a leaf and do it. Or is there like a Facebook community? Is there anywhere that you would suggest where people can get more information about stones they have and they want to find out what type of stone it is?
There are lots of options for you. It just depends on how diligent you want to be and what route you want to take. Online, if you know what color the stone is, you can always go to like Google image search and type in blue stones or whatever else, and you might get lucky and find a picture of it. There is a mineralogical database. They don't do the metaphysical airy-fairy stuff at all. So if you go there, they're happy to help you ID things. Just don't talk to them in our language. Talk to them in their language. And it's called mindat.org, MINDAT, like mineraldatabase.org. I'm sure if you're in the spiritual community, you've got at least one friend on Facebook who can probably help you ID. So just post a photo and someone will find you. They'll help out.
Well, thank you. Where can people find out more about you, your books, workshops that you lead, and things like that?
Well, very, very shortly. In fact, maybe even by the time this airs, I'm going to have a website up and running. It's going to be www.theluminouspearl.com. You can also find me on Facebook with theluminouspearl.com. And currently, if you just go to Amazon, you can type in my name, Nicholas Pearson, and find my author page. I keep lots of events posted there. I try to make sure that is very current, as I will do for the website when it's here too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and being on the show today. I'm sure that our guests have learned a lot, and I hope they're willing to go out and explore the realm of stones and crystals a little bit more with what they've learned from listening to you today. For all our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a very present moment. Namaste. Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.